Ask the Podcast Coach for May 1st, 2021.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that fun-filled music that means it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Happy May Day, which, like, last year at this time, we were begging for May to get here. Remember, it was like April was the longest month of our life, and I don't know what happened to April. I hope all our listeners had a great April, and just remember, before you know it, your 2021 taxes are going to be due. So make sure you're right. I mean, it's going so fast.
Yeah. We've got a private Q&A today for our patrons as well as members of the School of Podcasting. And here I was thinking, like, you know what? As soon as the show is over, I got to jump on my taxes. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're doing an open Q&A. I
know. I got to get my taxes done this weekend too. And somehow we coordinated again. Listen, we don't do this on purpose, I swear to God. But I got in this morning, I'm like, oh, we're all blue. And actually, your shirt's purple and so is mine, but they look blue in the camera.
Yeah, because everything's all blue. But
what's not blue?
That's right. Is that
coffee?
That awesome coffee mug from Glenn the Geek Hebert over at Horse Radio Network. But you know what goes good with coffee? A great brand. You know, you're just like, not brand like in cereal, a brand. And if you need to work on your brand, well, then you got to go over to podcastbranding.co, where our buddy Mark will take care of you. And if you're like, what's a brand? He will actually go over your website, your podcast, everything, and do an audit. And then he might say, hey, you know what? I can make new artwork for you. He'll do that. And maybe he goes, I think you just need a logo. Or maybe you need a whole website. The beauty of it is it's a one-stop shop for all things making you look professional. And the other beauty of it is Mark's a podcaster. Come on. You have no idea how cool that is when you don't have to explain to somebody what a podcast is for your graphic artist person. So check him out. You can find him at podcastbranding.co. It's the place to go if you need branding stuff. Branding stuff? As I run over to start the clubhouse room.
Slurping hot coffee, not advisable on the first thing on a Saturday morning. That coffee is
hot.
I need to learn. I put it in a thermos, and I need to learn to leave that lid open because I brew it. I'm a perk guy. I love to perk my coffee, and it comes off the stove just temperature of the sun, right? And so put it right in the thermos. I have a really good thermos, but by the time I get to Ask the Podcast Coach, that thing is just super hot. So the slurp that I do as part of that is I gotta pour that thing a little earlier. My lips are burning.
I was gonna say Jim won't be able to talk for the rest of the show. He burned his tongue, everything else.
Exactly.
If you just joined us, you can jump in. If you're watching us on YouTube, it's askthepodcastcoach.com/join. And if you're listening on Clubhouse, if you just raise your hand, then we'll pull you up on stage and you can ask your question and promote your show and everything else. And we will get things up and going. And did we talk? I'm trying to remember. Were the subscription things out last week?
No, I don't think the Anchor announcement had been made. We talked a lot about the Apple one, but I don't think Anchor had been made yet. Yeah,
the Anchor one is kind of funny because it was it just me or does it reek of me too?
Oh yeah,
yeah. It was
especially with the timing. Yeah, you know, they've been thinking about it. I think Apple probably forced their hand. Like, oh, okay, we got to get this thing out with everybody talking about it, don't you think?
Well, yeah, and it's like, and we're not going to take any fees. And then you're like, oh, that sounds interesting. Then they go, oh, and by the way, when your audience subscribes, they can't do it on their phone, either Apple or Android. They have to go to a website, and all of a sudden you're like, this is not sounding good.
It wasn't ready. It wasn't ready. In other words, they wanted it to be ready, but it wasn't. But they felt like they'd get left behind if they didn't.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. And then last night I was on the Podcasters Roundtable, and we were talking about the fact that I don't think we mentioned it last week, but the interesting thing, we're like, hey, yay, Apple on keeping everybody's privacy. But then you're like, what if I want to leave? Like, how do I then tell my audience I don't have their email address? You'd have to put out a podcast that says, hey, if you don't mind, I'm now using Supercast, or I'm using Glow, or many of the other ones. I'm using Substack. So you kind of don't have those, but Paul Culligan always has a solution. He goes, what you do is if you're using Apple for, some sort of subscription, just make your first episode say, hey, I have a free gift for you. And then you send them over to a website where you get their name and email address. And I was like,
if they subscribe, they don't, at that level, you don't get name, email, not like Patreon. Oh, that's dumb.
Yeah, that's when I was like,
really?
And I was like, so that really is the case where you're the product. Like if it's
that's not ready. That's not ready for prime time. I mean, I can't imagine having a paid customer and not knowing who it is.
Yeah, it's all in the name of
I didn't
privacy.
realize that. That's all right. I'd stick if it were me and I had a choice, like if I'm between Patreon or Apple. I think just for that reason, I'm going to stick with Patreon. I mean, I just don't know why I would.
Yeah, see, I'm still thinking, Supercast, Glow.fm.
Yeah, those will work too.
Those will work too. I get all the information and I get stats, and it's not that much harder. It is one click. They have to click and pick what app they have. But I thought that was interesting. And the one thing, Brian Barletta, have you ever heard of Sounds Profitable?
No, I have not.
Sounds Profitable is where James Cridlin does Pod News. He also does Podland. If you're not listening to Podland, that's a cool podcast. It's kind of the extended dance version of Pod News. But Brian Barletta does a thing called Sounds Profitable, and he is just looking at monetization and monetization technology. He actually worked for Megaphone, I think, or one of those big companies for a while. And so we're all kind of looking at that. And I've totally forgot why I brought this up. Oh, the round table. That's
subscriptions,
so fun.
monetization, subscribing, Apple, Anchor, going. Well,
well, Daniel has a quote here while I think about it, because I had to go into my brain to remember Megaphone, and I was
when that happens.
Daniel says, but you could in your subscriber exclusive episode mention something like register your membership.
There's ways around this, and listen, while you're thinking of that too, there could be. I'm more of a multi-method model kind of guy. In other words, like I'm not going to put all my eggs in the Apple basket. I would have that. I might even have the ability to. I might take it over to Anchor and Spotify and say, you have an option over here. I had a listener contact me about Supercast, and he was like, you should try Supercast. Like I really like that model, and so I did the account just for him.
Right.
And yes, it's a lot of things to maintain and monitor. And you yourself have to determine, is it worth it to be able to go these places? But I'm a big fan of meeting my customer where they're at and not forcing them into some kind of model. No, sorry, you can't. At Gallup, we have we have multiple Facebook groups. They can contact us via email and a contact form. We got a chat bot. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. So Dave, I think the onus of responsibility is on the podcaster to make sure the listener has the way they want to do it. Not everybody thinks that way. But
well, and I finally remember my point. What Brian was saying, the thing he likes about all of this is it's getting people in the habit of paying for a podcast if they want to. And he was saying, and I need to check the terms, he was thinking of basically putting out the exact same thing. It's like, here's the free version of the podcast. If you'd like to support the show, you can go over here. And he was going to do something like $1.99 or 99 cents a month. And that I was kind of like, I don't know about that. But he said that way, if you want to support the show, here it is, $2 a month. And it's the exact same show. And I was like, that's an interesting idea. It was just a way of like, hey, if you like the show and you want to support it. And I was like, but I do kind of like the idea of the fact that in the same way, hopefully we can kind of do the opposite of what happened to music. It used to be music was something you paid for, and you had to save your allowance to get that album. And now it's like music is like water. You just turn it on and you don't even think it's
well, it is and it isn't. I mean, the ones who are making money off of it, i.e. Taylor Swift, I mean, if they have figured out there's still money, there's still big money in music. They just have gone up from it being necessary. Although that's not totally true, Dave. I mean, Taylor is re-recording her older albums.
Yeah.
And they're called Taylor's versions. And it debuted, Fearless debuted at number 1. Like, this is an album that was out, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever. It's exact same music. I mean, she has figured out, because she has this, she is so good. And I think this relates to podcasting, and that she is so good with her audience. Like, she is the perfect musician. She's a fan favorite. And she just does, whether regardless of how you feel about her music, whatever. And the fact that every song is a breakup song, I can't say it too loud. My daughter loves her and will come down and slap me. But she's really good with her audience. She does things that are good for them, that they really enjoy.
Have I ever told you the Eric K. Johnson Taylor Swift story?
Yes.
It's
with his daughter.
Yeah, and somehow Eric works for iHeart, and he's done a lot of backstage meet and greets. And he said he took his daughter, so he's like dad of the year. And somehow, I don't know how they got her information, but they ended up sending them a message, and it not only was like, thanks for coming to the show, but also had specifically mentioned what Taylor talked to his daughter about. And it was like this hyper focused personalization. I was like, that's amazing.
It was incredible. I got to hear that story from his daughter. She was in,
nice.
She was,
she
worked at Gallup as an intern. Yeah. For a while. And so super great. Glenn in the chat says, biggest mistake I made was starting Patreon at $1. And I think he's right. He says it should have done 3 or 5.
Yep.
Because changing it is, he changed it. But you find that people will pick the lowest option. And if it's 5 and they're willing to do it, it would take 5 new people to replace that. So anyways, I agree with that one as well.
The one thing I wish Patreon would do would be to have the ability to like just slap me some money. Like, hey, if I just want to give you $5 once, and not have to subscribe, and then unsubscribe and that whole 9 yards. Yeah, I've always said anybody that will pay you $1 will pay you $5, probably. Yeah,
it's probably time. I mean, inflation is up. I mean, if lumber is $4,000 a linear foot, you probably should start with 5.
Yeah, he says one thing I've noticed this year is new subs are averaging $8 a month. Before it was $5. Yep. We have a new subscriber, but I reached out to them and said, hey, what do you want me to plug? Because when you do become a new subscriber over at askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, or if you do just want to give us a one-time donation, you can go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/store, and you can also sponsor Jim's mug over there, all sorts of fun stuff at askthepodcastcoach.com/store. But it's one of those things where, because when they were talking last night and they were saying $1.99, I go, or first they were saying 99 cents, and I don't have one, but I held up a Mountain Dew bottle. I said, this is $1.33 for one. I go, am I not worth more than a Mountain Dew for 4 in a month? And they were like, well, they want to make it. And it's one of those things where when you start thinking, but if you make it so easy, everybody's going to sign up. And I was like, not always the case. No. Even if it's super easy and there's a subscribe button right there in Apple, I'm like,
well, and those 99-cent ones, you get to sign up if you change any of the pricing. They're gonna revolt and leave. Like that, they came in for budget, right? And so, I mean, listen, you can do anything you want, right? In podcasting, set it up any way you want. But I agree with all of this, and I did too. I took away my $1 plan and just put a $5.
So did I. Yeah. Well, plus it was like too many choices. It was like 1, 5, 10, or 20. And I was like, all right. Daniel from the Audacity to Podcast says that Podcast Movement a couple of years ago, Patreon shared research showing that people are just as likely to pay $5 as they are to pay $1. And they encourage offering an upgrade promotion. That's not a bad idea. So, so it's going to be interesting to see. I know, again, I was listening to Podland with James and Sam, and they played a clip from Pandora's, which I guess is now owned by Sirius or whatever, but they had some sort of earnings call. And one of the CEOs was kind of like, because they of course own Stitcher, which I say, of course, that hole is a mess. When I hear anybody, I'm like, wait, who owns wait, the what of the who? But they were kind of like we've got a subscription thing if we want to go that route. And they haven't really, they didn't seem super thrilled about it.
Craig makes a good point in the chat. He says Patreon depends on the market, right? $5 is a lot of money in some countries, and that's very valid and very true. So, I think Dave, you and I primarily are speaking to a U.S. U.S. based or English speaking in a lot of ways. I mean, that cover a lot of countries. It doesn't cover everything, but so Craig, it's always a good reminder. We have a product that we sell at Gallup flat rate across the world. And I have to remember sometimes, it's $20, which isn't a lot, but that is a lot in some countries. So that's the hard part of globalization, is getting it right, by region.
Yeah. Max, one of our awesome supporters, says Patreon shows the lowest 3 levels and a more button. I limited my 2 lowest levels, so the higher levels are now shown. There you go. It's a good move.
It's a good point. It's good.
Yeah,
very good point.
The other thing we should mention this week that really, really needs mentioned is the absolute. Apple just didn't seem in a giant hurry to fix Podcast Connect this week. And again, I was listening to James' show this morning, Podland, and James and Daniel, those two love to get into the nitty gritty. And James has said, and I when I heard this, I believe I pooped my pants, because I was like, I don't want to go to work on Monday. Is that it used to be with Apple, when you had kind of 2 views of Apple. You had if you're on iTunes, which still does exist on a PC, you have the store view, and then on the app, that's the search view. And then you have the library, where you go after you have subscribed or followed a show. And so the subscribers always got it quicker than anybody in the store or the search view. There was at times a 24-hour delay. And now it sounds like that, according to James, is that the thing where when you subscribe, you are now directly connected to that person's RSS feed, that has either gone away or it's definitely going to be much slower. And I was like, so I'm going to get 50 million tickets saying, hey, I published my show at 8:00. It's 10:30 and it's not an Apple podcast. What's the problem? And I'm like, because that happened, by the way, this week. In fact, I don't know that it's fixed yet. Spotify had I think that this is what drives me nuts. They might admit this to Libsyn or a Blueberry or whoever and say, hey, we're a little behind in processing new episodes, but they never say it publicly. And it makes total sense. If you publish something, you wait a couple hours and it's not where it was, and you normally don't have this problem, the first thing you're going to think is, hey, it's my media host. So it's like this week, I felt like going to the president of Libsyn and saying, you need to send an invoice to Apple and Spotify, because I supported very little Libsyn stuff this week. It was all questions about Apple and Spotify.
Yeah. I logged into my Gallup Apple account to submit a new podcast. Is it fixed? Like, I mean, I had trouble getting in. I had trouble.
It took me 8 days, and it's really, what was interesting was watching. I finally said, I had a client, and I said, hey, can you share your screen? I want to see what this looks like. And so she went through, and it said, do you want to start a new show with an RSS feed, or do you want to start a new show? And her knee-jerk reaction was, I want to start a new show. And I go, no, you're using your feed from your media host. And so she then chose that. But it was interesting seeing that she was going to choose the wrong one, because the one without the RSS feed is the one that is going to be the one you sell. Daniel says he can confirm that Apple Podcast users are no longer subscribed directly. That is sad. That is a bad move, kids. So raises
subscribe directly means now you got to come back. The podcast app is coming back to Apple before it gives the feed. Is that what that means?
Well, it used to be you would subscribe,
right,
and like the feed for this one is, I think, askthepodcastcoach.libsyn.com/RSS. And that typically is updated. When you hit publish, your actual episode is probably there within 20 minutes.
Right.
So if you go into your Apple Podcast and you kind of do the swipe down and you tell it to refresh, there's your episode. That's great. Where it might not show up in the actual store view for hours,
Right.
and like and the other thing they did, and I just was like, Apple, what are you doing? Is they took away the option in Podcast Connect to refresh your feed. Because I had a guy yesterday, he had 2 days ago, he put out an episode. It's not in Apple Podcast in the search view, in the store view, but I subscribed to his show because I still have Apple iTunes on my PC. It was there because iTunes connects you directly to their feed. So now we're waiting for kind of like the public view of Apple is going to be the only view you get. And that's always way behind. So
for these paid subscriptions now, if you follow, is the follow the old methodology where you get the
no, that's what they're saying. Is now
same thing for both, huh?
Yeah, when you follow, it's like you're. So yeah, and Daniel says we have yet to see what really happens if you're subscribed to a show that gets removed from the Apple Podcast catalog. Oh yeah, that's it. Because see, here's the fun thing: is if you, let's say you subscribe to Alex Jones because he's an easy person to talk about. That's a guy that got removed because he was saying things that people deemed silly and stupid. So, but if you subscribed in the old version, I was subscribed to his feed. So now you pull him out of Apple Podcast, doesn't matter. I'm connected directly to Alex. With this new thing, if you get removed from Apple Podcasts, now you've got, now I've got to manually go back and subscribe to Alex. Mm-hmm. So that could be kind of sticky, but it'll be interesting. And Daniel says the speed's probably going to improve as Apple works out their transition issues. Yeah, it's just one of those where you kind of go, did you not run a simulation on this? Did you not? Was this not in beta somewhere? So
it's a bunch of interns. The building this. The rumor has it that the database they're using for this is built off the blockchain, and they're using Dogecoin for it. So you never know. That's why it's so valuable.
But they've had Overcast has switched. They've now where a lot of companies were using the back end of Apple to build their database. So when people did a search in their app, and Marco over at Overcast is now using the podcast index, the Adam Curry podcasting 2.0 thing. So
how do I submit over? Do I have to submit over there? Or how does that get pulled in?
In theory, if you were in Apple, I would be pretty sure you're there.
I'm just launching a new podcast at work. Do I need to make sure that's somewhere other than Apple?
Yeah, and I have yet to go over there to submit a new show, but I know you can do it. I think if you submit your show to Blueberry will submit it to the podcast index.
Okay.
Something like that.
It's listen, we launched a new podcast in French this week, and it's been, I got one episode, it's been out for a couple weeks, but I'm starting to catch up with and there's a million places to submit this stuff to now. Like the distribution, we're Spreaker customers. So the distribution dashboard that they have, I think is up to like 12 or maybe 13 where they will submit it for you. I don't do I submit it to Apple, I submit it to Spotify. The rest of them, I don't really care about. So I just let them submit them because it's a one click, super fast to get it in there, right? But now you're mentioning all these things like, oh yeah, I probably should be making sure it's submitted over a Blueberry, and oh yeah, I should probably. So it reminds me I probably should update my list.
Yeah, there's Ghana, there's the one you can kind of skip, at least, and this is just my opinion, is Radio Public. Okay. Radio Public was recently purchased by Acast, and they've gone radio silent. So Radio Public is the new Google Play Music. It's like it's there, but it's not really there. And my guess would be it's not coming back. And then
that's a big launch when they launched that at Podcast Movement a couple of years ago.
Yeah. And listening to James on Podland, he said that probably, so that's a big probably there. The reason that Acast bought Radio Public was for some guy that's the vice president. Who it's one of those where it's like, and that would explain why they're not doing anything with the technology. The website's still there, but
buying companies for people is always a little sketchy because you buy them, you pay them, they find something else to do. And I mean, I guess contractually they could be obligated or whatever, but
that is true. Like if you get bought and you're like, okay, but I don't like my new boss, I want to quit. Well, you can't. I'm like, well, I don't think that's.
I'm sure they work all that out when they're, when they're considering, when they're negotiating. But I've never seen an acquisition where the people actually stay around for the most. Maybe one or two, but it usually, you buy it. I always hear them, yeah, they bought it for the talent, and it doesn't always, that doesn't always work as well when you do that, because people are like, this was okay. They take their payday and then they move on.
Yeah. Well, that, and they liked being on a small startup because small startups can make a decision and start working on it later, and that whole 9 yards. And now I'm working for, something the size of the Titanic, and you go to turn and you're like, yeah, we don't turn on a dime anymore. It's got to go through a committee.
Do it that way. Yeah, it's not done that way.
Got to go through legal first, and you're like, wait, what? It's like, yeah, that's always kind of different when you go from
some of the bigger organizations are learning that, like, leave them alone. Like Microsoft bought LinkedIn and then just left it alone.
Yeah.
And LinkedIn has grown tremendously. I mean, that is, to watch what they've done in the last 5 years is pretty amazing. So I think there's some lessons in that too, of, in acquisitions. I know sometimes you got to consolidate, but yeah, I think there's some lessons there.
Well, that's where, same thing in music. A lot of times the best music that has come out is where I watched a YouTube documentary, and it was a musician, and they brought in this AR guy who was like, oh, no, you need to write music like this and that. And she just went to the record head and said, look, I appreciate that you guys have given me a contract, but this guy's like wanting to make me do everything completely different. And the head of the record label is like, let's get her a new person to work with. And that person just kind of said, okay, show me what you got, and I'll put some icing on the cake. And, I can't remember her name, but it was one of those things where you're like, yeah, let them do what you want. But, people that I like, I just let them do what they want, especially when it comes to giving me money.
Yeah.
It's these awesome people, the Ask the Podcast Coach awesome supporters. And we are talking, well, first of all, we have the teacher's pet. That is James over at the Dog Podcast Network. I almost want to get a dog so I can then, walk it around the block and listen to Dog Edition, where they have all sorts of great stories about dogs that happen to also have a podcast. And if you want to win some money, they've got a contest going on over there where you can win $5,000. That would be nice. That's 25% of a garage.
Yeah, that'd work. I've even considered asking my neighbors if I can walk their dog. I'm like, hey, if I bought a leash and at a certain time I came by, could I walk your dog? Because I don't want one. Like, they're a pain. They're dirty. They're, you got to clean up after them. But right. I'd love to have a dog on my walk. So I don't know. That way I could listen to Dog Edition. That'd be a great way to listen to it.
There you go. And we always thank our awesome $20 a month supporters. We just heard from him earlier, Max Trescott over at aviationnewstalk.com. So if you're a pilot, you definitely want to check out aviationnewstalk.com. Greg over at the Indie Drop-In Network. If you've got a true crime show, a comedy show, or some sort of scary story, he's got an audience that's looking for your kind of stuff. You can find him at indiedropin.com. Shane over at spybrary.com. I've been following Shane. He has been running, I think it's an hour a day, and he's going to do it 90 days in a row. And he is just crushing it. And I don't know. I think if I tried to run for an hour, I'd get about 10 minutes in and go, yeah, that's enough. Enough of that.
I used to do that. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Glenn the Geek Hebert over at horseradionetwork.com. If you like horses, well, then you'll like Glenn, because he's got about, 37, 50, 500 shows, something like that, over at horseradionetwork.com. A very entertaining guide. He was out riding his bike this morning in Florida. I saw that on his Facebook. Ed Sullivan over at soniccupcake.com. We might be talking about Dave and the guys up in Boston here in a second, but that's where Ed is. If you need an editor, check him out at soniccupcake.com. Felix over at the Latin Podcast Awards, which has been around since 2017. So if you're looking for Latin podcast, check them out at latinpodcastawards.com. Greg over at debtshepherd.com. Jim mentioned tax season. Hey, it's fun for the whole family. If you need some help, just any kind of financial wellness, that's what Greg teaches over at debtshepherd.com. Kim over at toastmasters101.net. If you're a podcaster, which my guess is you are, and you want to develop your voice or reduce your editing time or improve your content, check it out at toastmasters101.net. Michael Delaney over at Baby Mountain Radio Productions, where podcasting and hard work are made fun. I believe Michael is in the chat room as well. Check him out, babymountainradio.com. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. But if you're like we mentioned earlier, if you just want to like donate to the show, or if you want to sponsor Jim's mug, you can go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/store. And that's where you can do that kind of stuff, including buy my book. And thanks to all of our awesome supporters for, well, supporting the show. And that's where, that's why I do the whole askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. Because if later I want to move to a different platform, I'm not going davejackson.com/ or I'm sorry, patreon.com/davejackson. I'm going to ask them that way I can switch it. Because when right before Patreon, Google had a thing called, I want to say Joyride, but that's not it. Jaywalk.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Jaywalk before Patreon, and Google bought them probably for the people and shut it down. So had I been telling people, oh yeah, just go to jaywalk.whatever AI/Dave, whatever. Yeah. So that's when I was like, I'm going to start making a generic link so that in the event,
right,
either A, something goes out of business, or B, you change it. I'm able to do that. And if you're listening on Clubhouse, you can raise your hand and we'll throw you up on stage and answer your question. And there it is. Can you hear that by any chance?
No.
My neighbor is mowing the lawn. God bless God bless the noise gate on the Roadcaster.
Yeah, no, you can't hear it. It's funny. You hear way more than you think everybody else hears, right?
Yeah. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join.
I hear it now.
Yeah. Now that I'm talking.
Oh, that's
it's one of those things where it's like, it's so loud, I can almost feel it in my chair. I was like, oh, great. Wonderful.
He must be close. I listened to a YouTuber who has a train that lives by a train, crossing. And, you hear, wah, wah, and he just embraces it. He's like, hey, train's here. And it's become a part of his shtick, part of what he does. In every video, there's a train announcement as the train's coming through. So he doesn't try to hide it. He doesn't get frustrated with it. He just goes, well, train's here. And it's a sign of spring, Dave. I went out this morning. I made coffee, sit on the deck for a few minutes before we started the show. And all my neighbors are out mowing their lawn this morning. I've because of the show and then post-production, I won't get to it till about 1:00 today. So I'm the late neighbor. They're all sipping their lemonades and enjoying the day by the time I get out there. But it's a sign of spring. So just embrace it.
Well, I mean, back in the day, I had a cat that would just interrupt all the time. And I eventually was just like, all right. And Bernie likes that microphone as well. And, he became a staple.
I miss Bernie. I
do. I did a thing, Amazon, if you have an Amazon show or a Fire TV, you can now upload photos to Amazon and it'll make it your screensaver on all your Amazon devices. And so there was a picture I have where it's me in a winter coat and a hat, and then I had Bernie stuffed in my coat. See if this little cat head sticking out of it. But one thing I besides telling people that, hey, it might take longer for your podcast update in different apps. If you haven't been contacted by Verbal, have you been contacted by Verbal yet, Jim?
I don't think so.
It usually starts off with, Jim, you rock. Because I've gotten like 3 different emails and they're the exact same email for different podcasts. And this is a website where they've made a channel for you. Yeah, and I still don't quite understand what it is. It looks like
I think I didn't remember seeing this. I kind of ignored it.
That's my point. I'm like, it's like it's interesting that they tell you how great your show is, but they don't say why. That's always a big one.
They scraped an API to do this, didn't they?
Yeah. That's another one you kind of go, podcasters talk to each other. So when you're like, hey, man, I got this great deal this morning. Really? Yeah, there's some company and they say they really like my show and they want to promote it, and then all your friends go, yeah, I got the exact same thing. And you're like, oh, and then all of a sudden you don't feel quite so special. So if you got that, that's always kind of fun. And then Coach Dave in the chat room says, the Roadcaster Pro saved my butt 2 days ago. I was guest on a show with the CEO of a software company, and after a delay, I got a long apology email on how OBS didn't capture my voice. I asked, why don't I send you my copy? There you go. Yeah, if you're doing any kind of interview, either as a guest or a host, I always record it. And I've had that happen where somebody will do the call of shame. They're like, I'm so sorry, but we didn't get your voice. And you're like, that's all right. I got a copy right here. So always have at least two things going on.
It's a good reminder when you're the guest. Like I think about that when I'm the host of having, backing stuff up or having a couple different ways. But I've been doing a few more interviews over the last couple of weeks. For me, it goes in spurts. Do you find that happens that you get a bunch of interview requests and then it's quiet for a little while and you get a bunch of interview requests? It's almost like some influencing podcaster said, the way to grow your podcast is to
right.
And then all of a sudden you get a ton. Does that happen to you? Because that's how it happens to me. Or is it pretty steady for you?
That's a good question. I would say, yeah, it's fairly steady for me. But the thing is, what's steady is the fact that I get pitched either to have somebody on a show or to be on their show.
Yeah.
The pitching to have somebody on my show is never ending.
Oh yeah. Well, that's spam though. That's spam, right? I get that all the time. Hey, I want to have somebody on your show. Can I put? I'm a virtual, I'm assistant for so and so. Can we put them on your show? Whatever. And I ignore most of that, but I get these. For me, I get these spiky kind of moments, and it's a good reminder. Like I just did one the other day, and I'm like, ooh. I didn't need to. She did a great job. But I was like, ooh, I probably should have a backup copy of that just in case. It's a good idea.
When you get interviewed, because when I do interviews, you always have that voice in your head that's like, oh, I need to remember that. I got to ask a follow-up as you're trying to listen. There's all sorts of things going on. Do you have that when you're the guest as well?
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I ask the host questions.
Yeah.
You'll be talking about something and you're like, I don't know, what do you think about that? And that's not why they had you on, but it's so ingrained in what I do. I want to hear their opinion.
Yeah, I'm always like, I'll get done with an answer and the voice in my head will scream like, that was too long, get to the point. Or like, did you really answer the question? And I'm coaching myself as I'm talking on an interview.
Well, we spend so much time thinking about and coaching on good interviews. Yeah, you're right. Listen, even on this program here on Ask the Podcast Coach, I'll be talking and I'm looking at you and I can see your facial reaction. I'm like, I need to stop. Like, let's wrap it. So it's that feedback, right? That we get. I don't feel like I've been talking a long time, but that's not the nature of the way that works. You feel like, man, I just started talking, but no, you've probably been going a while. So yes, I catch that on this show all the time.
I always enjoy when somebody will, like I was just on Talk About Talk. I don't know when she's going to publish that, but this is Dr. Andrea and she's all about communication. And that was her whole thing, was like, what have you learned from podcasting about communicating and what's a good way to communicate via podcast and things like that. So it wasn't quite the same simple, what's the best microphone kind of interview that I do a lot. So that was kind of fun to approach that from a different, I don't know, it's still talking podcasting, but a different angle, I guess. So I did see a question that I found. I don't want to say I found it funny, but it did make me giggle. And this was in, I think, the Podcast Movement Facebook group, because I always kind of go out and look to see if there's, any kind of question that we might want to answer. But I just thought this was fun. I've recently just started a podcast, and I'm looking to begin reaching out for ad sponsorships to feature in my episodes. I have a little following, and Jim, what do you think a little following is these days?
Oh, I don't know, 100 maybe.
Yeah, she has 12 listeners. So when she says a little following, at least she's being honest. And I'm not sure how to approach companies to ask to advertise on my episodes for a small amount of money. And so I kind of always say step one of monetization is growing your audience. And by that, I don't mean 12. We're talking, and
you could sell. I know there's an exception. You can sell into 12 though, if they're really engaged.
Right.
I just did, last week on a show, I did a brand new affiliate sponsorship, and immediately I had somebody contact me and say, okay, I'm in,
Nice.
and this is one of our regular engaged, I talk to him all the time. So if those 12 are, and I'm by the way, I'm agreeing with you. I'm just saying
Right.
you can have 12 if they're highly engaged. You could pitch something to them. I mean, that would
Well, and
actually
if it
work.
fits. So it sounds like in your
Right,
case, you
right.
found something that,
Oh no, right on.
yeah.
Right on. Fit right away. Yeah.
Yeah, that's because I talked to a guy a couple weeks ago that does a show for dog walkers, and I told him, I said, you need to talk to James over at the Dog Podcast Network.
Yeah, yeah.
But that guy got a sponsor because he found some. Actually, the sponsor contacted him and said, "Hey, he's not I guess a dog walker, pet sitter, whatever the official term was." And these people had a software as a service kind of company made for people that are pet sitting. And they're like, we want to sponsor your show. And I was like, and he's nowhere near the, thousands of downloads that you need to where you normally get a sponsor. So if you have a hyper niche show, then by all means, you can always find something that's going to fit. So,
or a hyper engaged show. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I don't even, it doesn't, Home Gadget Geeks is not a hyper niche. I mean, it's pretty broad. We talk about everything from Teslas to Bitcoin, which are kind of the same thing now, and because they get mixed up in the news all the time, to home automation, to mowing your lawn, to all those kinds of things. Oh, I should say lawn care. But I have 50 really engaged listeners who contact me all the time. They're in a Discord group. I chat with them, kind of thing. So you can, I think you can still be. You don't have to be hyper niche to have a hyper niche audience either. If you're, but it takes cultivation. You actually need to talk to them. I've seen a lot of podcasters. I'm like, well, when's the last time you talked to your listeners? Oh God. Like, I don't actually talk to them. Like, I'm not going to take a phone call or anything, and you're like, well, you might want to think about jumping on a Zoom call or something with somebody.
Yeah. Well, and that's what Glenn does with his, I forget, the auditors, I think is what he calls them, his patrons. And all the fun stuff goes to his patrons. Like any free stuff or giveaways, it's all like, well, first things first, you got to support the show. And then, you go that route. Coach Dave says, I have 2 sponsors, 3 shows in. They were not buying my audience. They're promoting a message they can't or won't put into a microphone themselves.
Yeah. I mean, you can be making a commercial for them that they could share on their site, that they could, it's disguised as your show.
Right.
I think you have to be very clear about that now. Hey, speaking of that, did you see, and this has been happening a while, but YouTube is getting very, very, and concerned is not the right word, but if you're doing a YouTube video and it has a sponsored ad in it and you got paid to do that, they want you to disclose it. And I know, again, this isn't new. It's been going on for a while, but they're getting really pretty serious about this. So if you're also pushing your stuff to YouTube and you have sponsored ads in your podcast going to YouTube, you might want to spend a few minutes kind of updating yourself on all the YouTube terms and conditions, because they want you to disclose, this is I was paid to do this video. So just a reminder, check your YouTube settings.
So like if I were to say, hey, yesterday I bought a Bob and is it Brad? Yeah, Bob and Brad muscle thingy.
Did they pay us to be on? Then you're fine.
That's fine. But if they paid me, I'd have to.
If they paid you need to disclose. Yeah. And it's gonna put a little banner up on the video now that says paid advertisement. Yeah. Well, technically,
that makes it. Yeah, that's the old.
Yeah.
That's not new. It's the FTC if you're in the States going on. So, yeah, interesting. Jack in the chat room, 4 months into our podcast hosted by 2X ACM award-winning Jack Ingram, averaged 1,000 listeners. Is that per episode? 7,000 views on YouTube. Jack has a record coming out with Miranda Lambert. Where do I look for sponsors? AdvertiseCast, Podcorn. I would, in this case, I would ask Jack, what are your favorite products?
That's a great
because
idea.
When Jack can talk about something without a script in front of him, if somebody wanted to sponsor this show, I would say, well, that would be Zoom, because I talk about the PodTrack P4 all the time. It'd be nice if they paid me for it. Now I have affiliate links for that, but
which is different.
Yeah,
not the same thing. if it's affiliate relationship.
Yeah, Dave says they might not be able to do advertising in the normal way, but they might be doing something different. A friend, the bird chick, she wasn't big enough for ads, but she did get a sponsor for some gear, her monoscope for bird watching. There you go. Yeah, you can always, you don't have to have a job. But again, what is that? Hyper niche bird watching. That's a pretty niche show.
Well, for Jack Ingram, I'd contact Jack's agent and say, hey, what are some do you have any any sponsors he's working with that he has great relationships that we could slipstream in to this one for a small fee? And that would be a great way to, because those brands want to continue to associate themselves with that artist or whatever. You see this a lot in NASCAR, where NASCAR is not about racing anymore. I mean, It kind of is, but it's mostly about advertising, and it's just a big, gigantic advertising fest. So music's getting this way too. Jacking around, you might want to check in with their agent to see what kind of opportunities may be there.
Yeah. Do you watch NASCAR? Hardly.
No.
My brother is huge, and here's what NASCAR is. It is a soap opera for what might appear to be men that because it's a bunch of people turning left for hours. Mm-hmm. And that part, in my opinion, is really not that. But what it's about is, did you know that Daryl and Billy Bob, like back then, he didn't like the way he nudged him, and Billy Bob's, and it's all about the story behind the racing. And I was like, this is just and I was like, well, when in doubt, go to the story. And it's all about, whoa, and little Stevie, this is his last year, he's up against such and such and blah, blah, blah. And he's got 12 kids now. And it's all about, and this is, he wants to win this one because his dad has cancer, all this, all these storylines. And I was like, this has very little to do with horsepower. And
ironically, NASCAR and Dancing with the Stars, very similar.
It is.
It kind of is. Or when you get into the later episodes of either The Voice or Idol, right? Becomes about the stories. That's what's interesting. The music itself is,
the one I can't get my head around. And we're kind of tying this into podcasting a little bit.
No,
right?
We're not. We're just talking.
The Masked Singer.
Oh yeah.
Because I will see this on YouTube where they do the big reveal. And one of them was Paul Anka. Now, Paul Anka was before my time. He was probably a crooner in the 60s, maybe 70s. I'm sure he's got a song that I would recommend. But it's kind of like it's either Bobby Brown was one of the Masked Singers. I'm like, so it's people that like are just dying to get on TV, and I kind of feel sad for them when I pull it off, and it's like, oh, it's Baby Spice, and I was like, oh, that's kind of sad.
That's the same B level, like it's the same B players that are on Dancing with the Stars.
Right? Yeah, they're not as athletic, because Paul Anka can't dance. He's 70, 80 something, who knows? But what are we sharing here on the screen?
I mentioned to you earlier, interesting as we think about the reutilization of content, and so. Back in these are monthly stats for our podcast at Gallup called Theme Thursday, and it's one of our most popular, I should say probably the most popular podcast. 1.2 million downloads so far, and it's done pretty well. If you look at the stats, we're looking at May of last year through May of this year, and you can see May through November and December in the early part of the graph that is there. And we average, in those months from last year. Now, we had a live podcast that then got turned into an edited version that came here. So this is the edited podcast that we promoted through YouTube and had all kinds of traction and a live audience, live material. Those were the May through November numbers. And they're just south of about 30K a month, not individual episodes. I think we probably do a couple thousand per individual episode. Well, then in December, and this is the power of doing daily. So in the middle of December, I started publishing a daily podcast that was 1 minute long. It was just the theme descriptions. So I did 34 of them from December 15th to January 15th. And of course, the numbers spike. Now, that doesn't mean I got more popular. It just means I I had more podcasts in the feed, right? And so
Right.
we kind of discount that because we know, like, okay, that was just a daily podcast. But this does talk to, what does a daily podcast do for you when we talk about numbers? Well, of course, you're overwhelming your feed, so you're going to see a spike. Then we go back to weekly in middle of January, and you see that dip. In February, we started creating recycled content. Dave, it was literally clips from 2019 and 2018 and 2019 that we've put in the feed. All I'm doing is making clips. This is content that's been released before on a weekly basis, same frequency as what we did last year. And we're setting records, which is just crazy, right? So you can see February, March, and April, and there's a slow decline. We see that every year anyways. There's a slow decline in that. But all three of those months beat any of the months from the end of the year last year. And the last year's numbers were pretty good, by the way. A lot of folks are saying, well, yeah, it was a pandemic, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Last year's numbers for us were great. So, I say all this to say, not to brag on the numbers, but to say, if you're in this world and you've got a ton of content, we had 6 years of content that was locked up inside these 45-minute episodes. We broke them out into 1, 2, and 3 minute clips. And the podcast has actually grown, or is growing, grew, however you want to phrase that, through this. So, if you're feeling a little tired of creating content, maybe look at it. This may not work for everybody, but maybe go back and look and say, can I recycle some of my stuff that maybe got missed in previous years?
You never know.
No,
It's worth a shot.
Yeah, I found it super interesting. I was sharing these numbers with my boss yesterday, and I was just like, not that I want to stop doing live, Matt, because like I like doing live podcasts, but I want to share with you, we're continuing to keep this channel alive and well reusing content. So
Yeah.
I think there's a good opportunity there for podcasters.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Randy Cantrell in the Yellow Studio down in Dallas, Texas, says, what are some of the mistakes you see hyper-local podcasters make? Are there any best practices? Well, the best practices are going to kind of be the same, which is, in fact, we might talk about that in post-show. Record a couple episodes and then pick your schedule. Because I see people that are like, I started off, I was going to do weekly, and now I'm thinking I'm going to do bi-weekly. And I'm like, yeah, kind of, not that that's a major sin, but if you can be consistent with your schedule, I don't know. I guess it would be, because I keep trying to do one, hence the akronpodcast.com shirt I have on. And like, I don't talk about sports, and maybe I could. To me, I'm like, for me, I'm trying to cover the stuff that's not on TV. I'm trying to go hyper. There's a interesting website. I think it's called Next Door, and it's like a hyper local, like super like hyper local Facebook, where like there was an explosion. I guess it's not an explosion. There's a company about, I don't know, 10 minutes that way, and all in one night I hear this, and I was like, and so I just went to Next Door, and people were like, did everybody else hear that sound? Like, what is that? And this guy's like, oh, it's a company. We have to let off something, blah, blah, blah. So it's really hyper local. So that's the thing. I'm trying to give the information that they can't get anyplace else. So I'm scouring a lot of Facebook places. That's what I'm doing, just because otherwise it's like a sports show trying to compete with ESPN. I'm like, I don't want to do. But the good news is a lot of the news on like, ABC, NBC, CBS is just, it's going back to ads. It's like, hey, Starbucks is changing the cup. Yeah, I know that's an ad. Okay. I know it's like, yes, it's a story, but I don't know. Jim, do you listen to any hyperlocal podcasts?
No, I don't. I've thought about it, and I've even done some content like it in the past. I think you have to really reset your expectations. In some ways, to doing hyper local is very what's the word I'm looking for, is kind of it's inside, it's like inside baseball a lot.
It is,
right? And that's actually good. You always say, Dave, and what I've heard you say, in your podcast, avoid inside baseball, because not all your listeners know the jokes. But when you're hyper local, they do.
Yeah.
The propensity to know the jokes may be higher. So I think there's an opportunity there. Reset your expectations on numbers to be possibly a lot smaller. But we have a Facebook group. So Steve Sleeper, who has been a long time listener to the show, he produces a North Omaha podcast, which is a niche of a niche. Like, I mean, it's not just Omaha; it's the history of North Omaha, right? So we have a Facebook group called Forgotten Omaha here that has, I don't know, 65, 70,000 people in it. It's a big, I mean, it's so big that they have to lock comments because it gets super political in there, right? Kind of deal. But Steve has tried to play to that audience before, and they're just not, they just don't match. Like I don't think it's kind of the same. You got to kind of go to a different place. So I think it's more of a struggle, but like you said, I think you get the opportunity to tell stories that aren't told. I think that's where you need to look for those kinds of stories.
My goal when I launched it was to interview a lot of local businesses, and then COVID hit and they all shut down. And I was like, well, oh, okay. So I'm actually thinking of bringing this back. I need to thin the herd. I have way too many podcasts, and this is one I've always kind of wanted to play with. But I also discovered that when it comes to Akron, Ohio, which is where I live, I don't really care that much about it. It's like, it's like, I thought this would be cool, but like, oh, look, somebody's selling, I don't know, a product.
There needs to be a motivation for you in it.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
I think.
Yeah, my goal was to like, hey, do you know you have a podcast consultant right in your own backyard? And if it's hyper, it's like, we'll see. But so yeah, I don't know if they're, I think that would be it. Try to, on one hand, I can see people like, oh, well, we can't compete with so and so. I'm like, okay, but what are they not doing? Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, everything I watch it's a Cleveland station, and they're talking about Cleveland, and every now and then they're like, hey, that little thing down the street in Akron is doing, such and such. And they're like I found out we have a minor league basketball team. We have a women's fast pitch softball team. There's all sorts of stuff going on in Akron that I didn't know. And that's the stuff I wanted to kind of get into. And I just, about the time I was getting into it, everybody got out of it. I was like, oh, well, I guess we'll do this later, maybe, or something like that. But
I did I know we got a wrap here, but I did a kind of a local fitness where I interview people not famous, but the famous here in Omaha, folks for that, runners or athletes or whatever. I did that for about a year, and it was kind of fun, and it got some pretty good hits. One of the things I would do is if I was at an event, I would then promote that event and help them post the results. And It's amazing when you help them do that kind of stuff. The next time you go, they're a little more willing to let you talk to the people. So it's still about relationships, right? You still got to get in there and make relationships. If you just show up at a race or whatever and like, hey, I'm a podcaster, they don't care.
Right. Who isn't a podcaster these days?
Exactly.
So yeah, it's one of the things I'm hoping to bring back. And the other thing, I didn't want to cover depressing news. So, and I don't know about you, but in good old Akron, Ohio, somebody's getting shot on a regular basis. And I was like, that gets kind of old. So I was just having a hard time finding the content I wanted to cover. So, but at any rate, you are right. It is about that time. So Jim, what is coming up on theaverageguy.tv?
Yeah, Mike and I spend a little time. He's gotten hooked on this Formula One racing channel on Netflix. I don't know if you've heard of that, but they have a subscription you can buy, and you get behind the scenes. I mean, from a podcasting standpoint, if you want to sell some behind the scenes access to your podcast, that may be something people are interested in. And so we spent a little bit of time talking about that. And then he kind of breaks down the latest Apple announcements. They announced their iMacs. And so he's got some interesting things. He's a Mac guy. He has some interesting things to say. I'll be publishing that, easy for me to say, a little bit later today at theaverageguy.tv.
Awesome. And coming up on the post show, so if you're listening to this now, it sounds like we're done, but we're not. Jack asked a really good question, or actually, I guess it's Matt, who is a podcast producer, asked the question, like, what's the best media host? So we're going to try to kind of talk about that. That's always fun because I work for Libsyn. So people go, oh, you say Libsyn because you work for Libsyn. It's like, well, no, I've actually been saying that for about 10 years. But we're going to answer that on the School of Podcasting this week. We're going to be talking about how did you choose your co-host? And we're going to talk about the pros and cons of that. So stick around. We do have some post show coming right up, and thanks to everyone for sticking around. We're here every Saturday. It was a horrible talk up. I can't see. I have the Roadcaster too far away, and I can't see how much time is left.
I think that's the first time I've heard you just destroy.
Yeah, I was like, that was horrible.
There. No, it's like the look on your face.
I was just like,
you just gave up. You're like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, I was like, oh, and I'm like, oh, that's not. Oh, we're at the end already. Oh, well, what are you gonna do?
That's so great.
Yeah, I get this question a lot. What is the best media host? So let's talk about what I want to talk about is not media host, but let's talk about theory of media hosts. First of all, there are free ones. There is Anchor, owned by Spotify, and then there's Red Circle. And for the love of God, I don't know why more people are not using Red Circle if you're going to go free.
It's pretty great.
It's pretty freaking great. Yeah. Dynamic ad insertion. The only thing I hate about them is it's free. And almost anybody remember Himalaya that got like $80-90 million? Yeah, they just quit doing free stuff. Why? Because free is not a good business model. So there's that. Great training wheels. If you need some training wheels, there's that. Then you have the Spreaker Captivate model, which is you can have as many podcasts as you want, as many episodes as you want. And even that is a little different. Spreaker, eventually you will run out of storage room, but it's a big limit. Captivate, you can have as many episodes as you want, as many, but where they get you, where your price goes up is when you start to get popular. So if you have 15 shows and they're all doing 100 downloads, you're probably fine. But if one of those all of a sudden gets 10,000 downloads, your price is going to go up. So there's that model.
Or they're going to cap you because
no, they don't cap you. They just raise your price.
Oh, automatically?
Yeah. And their whole thing is we're here to help you grow your audience. Well, of course you are. And I always love that because what podcast host isn't there to help you grow your audience? But I love Mark. He's a good guy.
Podomatic does both, by the way. They have storage limits and bandwidth limits.
Yeah.
So there's that model.
Which is why Podomatic.
They're still around though. Every week I still post out there.
Then you've got the Blueberry, Libsyn, Podbean. That's the major three in this kind of category. And that is they don't limit how many downloads you can get. You can be as popular as you want, but they limit how much you can upload per month. So like for me, I love it. $20 a month for I think both and this show and the School of Podcasting. That gives me advanced stats. And I can be on Oprah if Oprah was still Oprah, and it wouldn't matter. When I always say when President Obama was on Mark Maron and he got whatever it was, 900,000 downloads in 24 hours, it didn't cost him any more money. So now he also had an app. That's a whole other thing. I don't want to. So those are the big things. And here's the thing. And I'm kind of doing, this is about a month early. I've been thinking about this idea for about a month. So let's say I have a Ford Mustang. That's not a good, well, we'll say Ford Mustang. All right. 2 doors, whatever. What's a lot of horsepower in a car? I'm not a car guy. 450 horsepower on the hood. It's great. And it's red. Now the next one, they've come up with a special version of the Ford Mustang. It's 4 doors. And it's got it's got a tilt back, top on it. So you can put the top down, but it's 4 doors.
We say convertible.
Convertible. Thank you. I was like, and so
I'm not a car guy, but you are definitely not a car guy.
Yeah. No, 450 horses under the hood. Different features. Oh, and this one's blue. When it comes to which one is faster, you got 450 horses under the hood. It really, and I know people like, did the Libsyn guy just say it doesn't matter? What I say is it's not going to get you any more listeners. What gets you listeners is good content that inspires your audience to tell a friend. Now, the interface, you might like the interface a little better. So if the 4-door is a little harder to get in and out of, and that stupid top-down thing, I never use it anyway, that's where you got to look at the different features and things of that nature that, but in the end, switching from Podbean to Libsyn to Captivate to Spreaker is not going to grow your audience. They might make it easier to give you tools to grow your audience, but if you don't use those tools, and that's where I think he said he was on Podbean. I'm like, well, first things first, take a second, contact your Podbean support and go, can you look at my account and make sure I'm using everything I need to use? I get that on probably a weekly basis. Somebody will email me at Libsyn. I'm like, well, you're not on Ghana, you're not on player.fm, and you're putting episode 16 at the beginning of your episode titles. And that's the one that's fun, because technically I that's now consulting. So I shouldn't be telling them don't put episode 16 at the beginning of your title, but I might hint that maybe there's a better way to make your title
value added. That's value added service.
So Jim, any part of that theory that you go,
No, I think, there's some more powerful than others. There's some that have more options, to use your example. The convertible may be too complicated for some people. I don't want to deal with that level of complexity. For some folks who are price sensitive, this is where I'll bust the analogy out.
Yeah.
If you're price sensitive, you probably shouldn't be buying the Ford Mustang. You need the Ford Escort. Do they still make those? I don't even know if they make those. Focus, maybe they're Ford Focus. And if you're not price sensitive and you want all the bells and whistles, maybe it's time to get a Tesla. So it's such a personal decision in so many ways. And then obsess about it for a couple hours, pick one and go. Like I just think, eventually we get too stuck. I'm kind of this kind of guy too. We get too stuck on that decision-making process, and you're just like, you know what, pick one of those, group them together, pick one and go. They're all doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Even your friends at Anchor are pretty safe because they're owned by Spotify, right?
Yeah.
So even though they're free, they're owned by Spotify, who just has gigantic pockets. Red Circle they're doing well because they're selling the ads they sell are helping bolster their revenue. And so their ad insertion engine, which is really, really good, I think, is helping them. So I don't know, take those factors into mind, consider it, and then just pick one and move on, and then use it for what it is.
Yeah. And if you use Libsyn, use the coupon code SOP free for a free month. In fact, don't use that today. Use it tomorrow on the 2nd of May, and you will get all of May free, and then you'll get all of June free, because that coupon code is good for one full month. Well, if you sign up today, you will get a full month of May. So you want to sign up on the 2nd. So doggone it, you didn't get all of May, but you'll get all of June. So
yeah.
But yeah, so that's, and I see where Sergeant Fred is going nuts in the chat room. So let's see what he's talking about here.
Well, he wanted to know if I had any advice on somebody who could help him launch a podcast. And I said, well, I like Dave Jackson.
Yeah, I've helped Fred launch many a show.
So he said, so Dave's helped to do six shows, so I said, I still like Dave Jackson.
Yeah, I'm working with Fred because he's got one of his shows is under my Apple ID. And so I tried to resubmit it to Apple, and it got swatted down basically. So I've got to work with Fred to get into his WordPress so I can troubleshoot and get him back up and going. But we've got Coach Dave come in, and look at him he looks like he's like out of a Disturbed video.
That background is awesome, though.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah. It's like he's down with the sickness.
I'm not sure he's hearing.
Hey guys.
Hey, how are you?
I am not hearing you, so
yeah, we're not on your mic, so you might need to
out how this is.
It's
something doing on my
I don't
side.
think you can hear us.
Here's what I can do. I can actually edit his mic setting. That's cool. I can't.
No, not what he's pointing to. So go down Cam mic settings here in StreamYard is where you want to go. So drop them.
Yeah. So we're going to, and then in the private chat.
Yeah, I'll help him. I'll help him back there.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the fun thing is, and here's one thing I do like, that because Apple's Podcast Connect, it took them 8 days to get me back up and going. And one of the things I do like is, again, before there was a Podcast Connect, it didn't make a big deal if I submitted my clients to Apple for them, because once they were in, and there was no stats to look at. There was no Apple Podcast Connect. So I had like 70 shows in my Podcast Connect account. of which many of them are from like 2007, and those people don't podcast anymore. And I just had a ton of litter in my back end. And so one of the cool things about that is I'm able to now go into a dead show, and I think it's restore. And the minute it's restore, it's set as draft so that Apple can approve it, which they're not because it's the show's dead. And then I can say archive it, which actually gets it out of my thing. So yeah. So another quick question: do we know if Coach Dave is good to go?
Not yet. I've been waiting.
Okay.
Think back, Coach Dave. There's a private chat as a part of a StreamYard here, so make sure you're on the private chat. I gave you some instructions.
Reverend Ken Blanchard from Speak Life Church says, how are you recording interviews these days? I'm still using Squadcast. I just heard about Riverside, who got like another 9 million in VC money, and they're doing what Google that used to do the automatic switching? Google Hangouts?
Yep, you Hangouts.
Yeah, and it sounds like they've implemented that, and I need to go back and smell Riverside.fm, because when I tried it, it was hot off the presses and I did not have a good experience. But I've had enough people now that are saying it seems to be fairly, stable. So I need to maybe check it out. Are we good to bring him back? Here he comes. And
hey, that was strange.
Here we go.
You can hear us now. Not really that strange in the fact that you've StreamYard, because it's HTML5 based and is browser based, does not always inherit the settings coming in. And so if you've got default, are you Mac or PC, Coach Dave?
I'm on Mac.
So it inherits those default settings on Mac, which are actually really, really strong. Like Mac doesn't give up anything on that stuff. And so that's in StreamYard, that's the number one thing, because I use StreamYard all the time. It's the number one thing I have to coach people on when they first come in, is like, okay, let's get your settings right. So no worries there. Appreciate you staying around through that process.
Well, I figure I've been a freeloader on this show long enough. I haven't, I've been watching you guys for the last couple of years. You helped me get started 3 years ago when I started my show, and it's been really an awesome ride with the Ask the Podcast Coach and all the stuff that Dave has done. But I'm not here just to talk about stuff. I wanted to clarify.
You can talk more about us. Yeah, I mean, you can say more good things about us if you want. Sure. That's okay. No, go ahead. What's your question?
Well, I don't think you want me to get started, Jim, on how you appreciate your audience from this side of the chat.
That's right. That's right. Sorry, I'm still living with the backlash from that. I'm sorry, YouTube listeners.
Yeah. So the big reveal is, yes, I am a bald guy under that hat that I have on my image in the chat room. But no, I wanted to clarify a little bit on a point that I made earlier. It was about a specific kind of sponsorship. And the sponsorship, I haven't seen it in any books yet. Dave, I have read your book. I think it's awesome, by the way.
Thank you.
What I do is, that's the one. I do a show that is, it's called The Soccer Sidelines, but it's really not about soccer. It's really about this 15-year development window that happens when kids turn 3 and then they go until they're 18. And it's all about helping parents, and it's all about helping coaches, and it's about helping us deal with that 15 or maximize that 15-year window. And one of the things that I found is that since I'm in the nonprofit space, there's a lot of other nonprofits out there that also share the same kind of mission. And so by interfacing with those other nonprofits, I was able to say, hey, this is a mission that we share in common. And if you take on this show, basically what it becomes is like a bolt-on to your already existing mission. So I've been able to multiply that show in the nonprofit space throughout those other nonprofits, and they pay me $1,000 or whatever it is that they're going to pay me, and then they take that show and they deliver it out to their audience. Now, the other thing that I think was relevant to them, which made the show more attractive, is the fact that I'm also a club president, and I get slammed with emails.
Nice.
And so part of the show was a sort of an FAQ format where I was answering commonly asked questions by parents. And so when you talk to another club president and they see that, there's 300 episodes in there of all these answers to problems that, their parents are coming up with as well. The way I pitched it was, grab the episode that you like or that answers that particular parent's question and just send them a copy of it. It takes 20 minutes to explain a complex issue. And by doing that, I've added value to their day and they're willing to pay for it.
Yeah, it's something, Dave, I wish I'd have done. We do a similar format at Gallup with answering questions, and I don't have those questions available as easy. It's a 45-minute program they got to get into to dig the questions out, and I can lead them directly to it and some other stuff, but I wish I had been more intentional about pulling those questions out individually and making my own, making a Q&A section. Dave, you look like you wanted to say something as well.
Well, I when he was talking, I'm like, it's kind of in my book, but not really. Page 18 talks about Doug Parsons, who does the America Adapts, the climate change podcast at americaadapts.org. He was looking to be a 501c nonprofit. And what he did is he found out about these things called, I want to say it's fiscal sponsors. He said reading. Yes, fiscal sponsors are organizations that are already nonprofit, and you can basically take that organization and go under their umbrella. And then what happens is people donate. That's the biggest difference when you're nonprofit is if you donate to our Patreon, it's not tax deductible. But if you donate to a nonprofit, it is. And so they donate to the head, whatever the head organization is. They take, I think it's like 8%. And then the rest of that money goes actually on a debit card for Doug. So that was something, another way, if you want to be a 50, if you want to be a nonprofit without having to form a board and all that other fun-filled activities that go with that, you might look for a fiscal sponsor.
Actually, Dave, you'd bring up a really good point because I am not actually a 501c3 myself. The organization that I lead, one of the organizations I lead is a 501c3, but the show itself is not. The show is just Dave on a microphone and we talk. And I actually get paid for that. So you can get paid by a nonprofit or a series of nonprofits. They give me the money. My club is not mentioned except for as a sponsor.
Oh, nice.
Right. And then all the other clubs that I talk to in the course of the year, I just, in a board meeting or whatever, I'll just say to them, you know what, this is a product's worked out really well for us. You can bolt this onto your club or your organization as well. Just, here's the fee schedule.
Yeah. Cause what Doug did was he then found other people that are into climate change and that were spending thousands of dollars on white papers that nobody was reading because they're these giant things. And he just went to them and said, hey, you've got content. Instead of spending thousands of dollars on this white paper, why don't you give me that money? I'll work with you. You'll come on my show. I've already got an audience. And we will turn your white paper into about 3 different podcast episodes. And instead of paying thousands of dollars to make something that nobody's going to read, you'll be spending thousands of dollars to definitely get this listened to because here's how many listeners I have. And I was like, that's a cool idea. So,
Dave, as a club president, did you see any changes this last year? How did that affect clubs and some of those organizations? Sports took a hit during the pandemic. Do you see many changes, and do you have some recovery to do to kind of pull out of this?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it wasn't just that sports were down. It's that what was everybody doing instead of sports, right? And there's a lot of sort of human stories behind the scenes. I'll give you one example. As a person who's plugged into a community, I have a lot of conversations during the week. I don't do them all on video like this. Is kind of nerve-wracking, but there. But when I'm talking to parents, I'll give you the example. This one mom called me up, and she's home. She's got 3 kids. They're all young. Her youngest is 18 months. And then she's got one that's 2 years. And she's got one that's 3. Dad was just hospitalized due to COVID, and he was now on a ventilator. All 3 kids had COVID, and they were all COVID positive. Mom was COVID positive, and now she's starting to realize some COVID type symptoms where she believes she's going to have to be hospitalized. And we're talking back in, I don't know, May, June of last year. We really didn't have any idea how many people were going to recover from this. And so the story was, we had this desperate mom who was trying to find somebody to take her kids for her, who was okay taking care of COVID positive kids, which there weren't a whole lot of us around that were willing to do that. And so, you know, that's the kind of thing that occupied my time during 2020, was running around. I mean, we did find a nurse who had COVID already, and she was able to come in and take on all 3 kids. And fortunately, the end of this story was happy, because both parents went home and returned with the kids. But, you know, if you're a parent and you're facing your own mortality due to this disease, that's the kind of thing that we were dealing with. So no sports, no podcasting. You know, my wife was deployed into COVID hot zone. She's a nurse practitioner, so she was taking care of a lot of COVID positive people. She's on the border now because she's taking care of all the stuff that's coming up over the Mexico border.
Wow.
And so it's been a very busy time for us, and we've had to put some of the fun stuff like podcasting on the side.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's where life meets reality.
Yeah.
You know, and you're like, yikes. We actually have to take care of some of these things. So appreciate that.
I'm going to jump off on a happier note, I think, because I feel like it really depressed this show.
No. Don't feel that way. It's good.
It's not all dark and gloomy in Coach Dave's life. I also told you guys that I was tearing apart my basement, and I was going to soundproof that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like a year ago, I think I started talking about it. That project did go on hold. But if you're a podcaster and you're thinking about doing this, think twice. Because tearing the walls down and tearing the ceiling down and all that stuff, you're bound to find all kinds of stuff. And I did. So what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to put together a little video for you guys, and I'll send it over so you can share it with your audience, of what it means to actually tear apart a basement and try to soundproof the thing, and all ceilings and all that kind of stuff. It was quite a job.
There's a lot to it, and there's degrees to it as well. I mean, you can kind of do the easy, and then there's an intermediate, and then there's really like professional soundproofing, right? And and right now supplies are expensive. Like everything's expensive. So if you're thinking about doing it now, I'd love to. I'd love to hear your feedback on that. So appreciate a video in advance.
I started with a haircut a couple of years ago, and you can see where it ended up. So I don't do anything half.
That's what you had hair before you started the basement remodel, right? So
anyway, thank you guys.
You bet, Coach Dave. Thanks for jumping in.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. And I am sorry, YouTube audience, if I've ever offended you. Apparently, and I don't have Clubhouse. How many folks do we have on Clubhouse?
Clubhouse has been very light. I'm very happy that we have Kevin and Tristan there today, but we've had less than 5 people there.
You know, let me just say, I think Clubhouse is going through that dip. Just to be honest, there are some creators on Clubhouse. They're going gangbusters. So the niche, the folks who have found how to do this, have it gotten really popular. So you just now, like, we used to be able to log in on Saturday. We get 30 people in Clubhouse. Easy. Like, that was just low hanging fruit. Now we're like 5 or 6, right? And then, and I think that's going to be the case in Clubhouse. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. The folks who have cultivated a network and who have built it and who've worked it are doing really, really well. But I think if you're the average person just starting, you're going to have to work really hard right now on Clubhouse to get some things going.
Yeah, I did a thing this week. We talked about, starting a Walk with Dave segment where I would just start Clubhouse. And we did find out something that, like, when Dave is walking up a hill, you don't want to talk. Yeah, it's Dave's like, well, I think the microphone is kind of like,
let somebody else talk. That's when you need to let somebody else talk.
Yeah. Right. But Chris Nessie came on. That was fun. But it's because I'm always looking to talk about podcasting. So I did that. I found one room and got to talk a little bit, but maybe I was going in just to listen. But here's the thing that I was like, what? Because I jumped in the middle of the day. I was like, how about if I just turn this on like radio? I'll leave it in the background. Yeah. And there was a woman there, and it was supposed to be about social media, and it kind of was, but she announced how she had been in this room since the beginning of the day, and this was now hour number 7. And I was like, how do you spend 7 hours in Clubhouse and like make money to eat and things like that? And that's when she announced her husband, who apparently is an IT like head guy. And I'm like, that's how you do it. You have a spouse that's raking in tons of cash.
Yeah.
Because I was the whole time I was like, it wasn't a horrible room, but it was.
The influencers have definitely gathered their crowds. So
Yeah.
there are big clubhouse. I've jumped in there to look at some of the things that are going on, and they're 50s and 100s and maybe even more. But the small ones have definitely gotten smaller. I mean, the ease at which you just jump in and everybody's excited, like, I'll join anything. I think that's for now. Those days are over, right?
Yeah.
Dave, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Apparently, I'm using air quotes for our audio folks. Apparently, the Android app is out this month, which is since today is May, right?
That's right. It'll be.
So allegedly, it'll be interesting to see if we go through another wave of that when it hits Android, or is it too late? In other words, people heard about Clubhouse. It's easy to get into Clubhouse now. Like it's that the whole I need an invite thing is kind of over. It'll be interesting to see if that translates over to our Android friends and if there's a rush to get in there, or like, it's a Who concert, or only you and I really understand that reference. Is it crickets? Everybody's like, oh, Clubhouse, that's old news.
Well, and there was only one Clubhouse at the original part of this, and now there's Twitter, there's
but those are lame. Nobody's using those.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like Reddit's coming out with one. I'm like, why?
Me too. Me too. Discord has it. Facebook's trying to do it. Me too. Those never do as well. So I don't think anybody's jumped.
Oh, well, there you go. Speaking of Clubhouse, Daniel will be joining Michael Stelzner and Paul Culligan.
Nice.
So Michael Stelzner always puts on good stuff. And speaking of Daniel, and speaking of tearing down your basement, Daniel says, I found a mouse graveyard in my wall. It was where mouses went to die by falling in and not escaping. There was an inch thick of mouse remains and a little sign that said, abandon hope, all ye who enter here. So, but don't forget what Meerkat started. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I just know it's not going to replace podcasting. I'm like, no, it's not. So, but it'll be fun to watch. So, and hopefully sometime today, because we do have at 1:00, if you're a awesome supporter, you should have gotten an email this morning. We have a 1 to 2:30 thing today. So if you want to come in and keep asking questions, but you don't want to do it in public, that's there. And then I will be doing this episode. I'll be putting that out. And then so eventually sometime today, I'm going to fire up my grill. That's the plan. I got some chicken. I got some chicken and pork chops.
Nice. Low and slow, my friend. Just remember, don't low and slow.
I like the grill of Oz. That's always fun. You open up the lid, just whoosh. Yeah. So
you can create that with bacon, by the way. If you just put and then it just billows and it smells great. But low and slow on that grill. Just put it in. Nobody ever complained about it taking longer to taste really good. So turn the heat down. And go low and slow. Yeah,
last week was Weed Mageddon. I bought some weed killer.
Oh, that kind of weed.
yeah. Sorry. And really, Dave?
I got really concerned for a second. Yeah. I was like, wow, maybe I need a trip out to Ohio.
Yeah. Oh, we have a bunch of dispensaries and all sorts of stuff. Yeah. I mean, who doesn't at this point?
Oh, I know. It's not legal here in the state of Nebraska, but there's so much CBD. Is that the name? Is that what they call it? CBD? I always is that
THC?
Right? Yeah, or whatever.
Oh, but CBD oil, yeah,
the oils and stuff. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. Yeah. I'm like, why don't we just? Are we? Come on. Anyways, well, we never talk about these subjects, so we should probably end it. Right there. Dave, thanks. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your chicken and pork. Is that what you said? What do you?
Pork chops.
Pork chops.
Yeah. Good stuff. So
you get the really thick ones?
Yes.
Really thick, we call them Husker chops here in Nebraska, the really thick ones. So well, enjoy. I expect to see the smoke coming here from your grill there in Ohio. Have a good weekend. We'll see you. All right. Bye.
All right. Hey, Tristan, if you want to re-raise